I've been a trucker for varying companies for 10 years. Back in 2023, I was working for a warehouse company in Nebraska, doing shipments. I usually drove the Semi, which is what I was behind the wheel of on January 18th. It was a cold Monday, so the week was just starting, and a lot of loads needed to be shipped, so I was trying to bang it all out quickly. I started driving at 3 p.m. and intended on getting to the destination that same night. I didn't want to have to pull off on the side of the road somewhere to sleep. I did around 5 above the speed limit after 12 o'clock, which is fast for a Semi. I was starting to feel very tired, but the destination was less than an hour away, and I figured I could do it. My eyes were getting dry, and it was starting to become a chore just to keep them wide open. I splashed some water on my hand and then rubbed it on my face. It helped a little bit in waking me up. My truck was the only vehicle on this road at this hour, so besides my headlights, the road was completely dark. I remember reaching to take a sip of my water and almost spitting it out when I saw a figure approaching fast up in the distance. I hit the brakes hard, and as the truck slowed down close to a halt, I could better distinguish the features of this person, almost standing in the middle of the road. He seemed to be wearing all black, with some kind of black scarf wrapped around his neck, and he had an unnaturally long neck. I know it's a weird thing to pick up on, but it was almost freaky looking. His face itself, however, was a complete blur. They could make out any features as my truck slowed down and got closer to this mysterious man. I was about to roll down the window to ask if he needed a ride, but he just turned to his left and darted into the woods. I didn't take an extra second to stop and think about it. I just pressed on the gas pedal again and moved on, regardless of how freaky it was. I was in a rush. In fact, it wasn't even until about 20 seconds after that my heart really started racing from the taking, and how strange it really was. Maybe 5 minutes later, I was able to get over it, but just like that, something else happened. As I was back to my cruising speed, I saw something run across the street in front of me. At first, it looked like a big animal, but as I got closer and it crossed into the woods, I realized it looked like another person. I didn't even tap on the brakes this time. I just kept going, and I kept rooming down the road, maybe even stepping on the gas a little more, just because I was starting to get freaked out and wanted to get there faster. Another few minutes went by with nothing happening. However, I was getting increasingly tired, and at times I was even swerving into the other lane a little bit. 40 minutes are left in the drive, and I didn't know if I could make it anymore. I started looking around for good places to pull over in park for the night. There was eventually a little opening on the side of the road, made of gravel. I guess it was meant to be just a little parking rest stop kind of thing. I pulled the Semi into it, parked it, and leaned back and rested my eyes. I fell asleep for not even an hour, just to wake up out of nowhere to the darkness. I still don't know what woke me up, but as I looked outside through the windshield, something in my gut was telling me to turn on the headlights, and so I flicked the knob and lights lit up the surrounding area. In front of my truck, there was something in front of the truck though. A man. That's a man with the black scarf I'd seen earlier, standing on the side of the road. Now I could see his face much clearer. He had a very wide smile, and his eyes were open as wide as possible, and he looked right at me through the windshield. I turned the truck on and pulled it out of that little clearing as best as possible. I didn't know what to think. How could he have walked 10 miles from where I had seen him last? I didn't stop again that night until I made it to my destination. From there, I fell asleep in the parking lot and woke up early the next morning. Now, the only logical explanation I could think of is that my mind was playing tricks on me because I had been seeing strange things all night. I've never heard of a hallucination being so vivid and terrifying though, and that's the part that still really confuses and scares me. Before getting an office job in the city, I was a UPS driver for 2 years. It was good money, and I enjoyed it for the most part. It had its moments, though. It was 2010. I'd been out of college for 2 years. I was working 11 to 7 on a Thursday. It was the dead of winter, so it was dark by like 5 o'clock. I wasn't exactly living in Palm Springs either. I was living in a small town in North Carolina. I don't want to call it ghetto or salami, but it wasn't a very nice area at all. I did deliveries in that same town very often. The housing situation in this town was weird. Some blocks would have rows of houses and trailer homes spaced too far away from each other, while other blocks were just completely desolate. This made for less deliveries altogether because the houses were so spaced out and far from each other that it took longer than, say, a regular suburban or urban community. Deliveries were always marked on the map so that I could take a more strategic route instead of just driving all over the place. After hours and hours of deliveries, all over a span of at least 3 different small towns, I started heading down one of those streets I'd mentioned just now. Spaced out trailer homes and small houses on one side, forests on the other side. It's a little past 6 p.m. and my shift is winding down with not too many deliveries left. There was one house on this block, and the package was to be signed for it, meaning I couldn't just leave it on the stoop. I pulled up in front of the house, went to the back of the truck, and pulled out one of the biggest and heaviest boxes of the day. There was some kind of small metal pieces bumping around in the box, lots of them. I couldn't even try to take a guess of what could be inside. My job was just to lug the thing to the front door of the trailer home, and that's just what I did. There was no doorbell on this home, so I had to knock. There were no lights on in there, though. I didn't see a car out front, so I was hoping somebody was home. I knocked a few more times. Then I saw the curtains to one of the windows move and footsteps come to the door. Then there was a long pause, a suspicious and unnecessarily long pause before the door finally cracked open. Some older woman poked her head out, all when Lake, and when I said she had a package to sign, she opened the door fully at. She seemed fidgety. As I asked her to sign the device, she did so. It was a sloppy signature. She told me I need to help her carry the box into her room. I figured that would be the case. The moment I stepped into the trailer home, he got a huge whiff of some kind of stench. You know how every home has a distinct smell, whether it be good or bad? Well, this home smells awful. I don't know what it was. She was leaving me to a back section behind the tiny living room space. She took me to a narrow hallway where I struggled to carry the box and then brought me to a door. She opened the door and told me to maneuver the box into the closet in the back of the room. I asked her to flick on the light. She said the light didn't work. It was next to pitch black in there, the only source of light being the lamp from the living room seeping down the hall into this room. I could see just the slightest amount to navigate the box inside of the room. As a guy close to the closet, I saw someone standing in the corner of the closet. I knew for certain it was a person because of the shape of the outline, and there was movement. There was no logical explanation to this. This person was clearly hiding from me, waiting. I left the box where it was and walked past the woman and said, "Have a nice day." She started to scream at me to come back and help her, and she went as far as to call me a piece of... I didn't know what this woman and whoever was in that closet were planning on doing, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. I went on with my shift and went home that night, and thus began my job hunt for a newer, better job. I have been a truck driver since I was 25, and I've done a lot of night drives, and of course, had my fair share of odd experiences. I did deliveries for a number of different types of companies. Often I'd have to drive across state to make shipments to the receiving companies or stores. One day, I had to drive literally from one side of California to the other to deliver a trailer full of wooden furniture items. Much of the drive was through open desert roads. It was going to be many hours, and I already had a late start to the day, so I knew a majority of my drive would be in the dark. Given the nature of these desert roads at night, how straight they are, and how little traffic there is, it meant I could push the truck a little faster than I would on other roads. This meant that when I saw the flashing rear lights of a car in the horizon, I had to hit the brakes a little extra hard to bring the truck to a stop. When I finally pulled up behind the car, it was an old Chevy Impala parked on the side of the road in the desert dirt. It had its hazards on. I got out of my truck because, of course, I had to be a good Samaritan and check if they needed help. I walked over to the car and tapped on the window, only to get no kind of response. I bent down a little to look into the car through the tinted window. There didn't seem to be anyone sitting inside. I did the same thing for all 3 other seats and could confirm there wasn't anyone in the car, so I looked out into the cool, dark desert that the road ran through. Though I couldn't see any further than maybe 20 yards in front of me, I was feeling especially helpful this night for some reason, so I went back to my truck and got a flashlight from the toolbox that sat underneath the passenger seat. It was a heavy-duty tactical flashlight that was so bright it would hurt your eyes to look directly at it. As soon as I turned it on, it revealed what appeared to be an abandoned gas station on the side of the road. Apparently, I hadn't noticed it before. I guess the reason I didn't realize it before was because the whole fill-up or parking area was basically dirt. There wasn't any concrete. There were also only 2 gas pumps. Behind them was a small building, probably an old quick-stop store at one point. It would make the most sense that whoever's car was over there would be in that building. I went to the front door, which was permanently jammed open, and the flashlight lit up a decent portion of the room inside. It was what I thought a big convenience store you'd find at many gas stations, or at least it used to be. It was no wonder it didn't last on road like this, though. I called out to let anybody know of my presence and that I was there to help. There was the slightest bit of echo in the room, which gave me chills for some reason. Then I heard something, probably a shoe scrape against the floor, on the opposite side of the room behind a few shelves that were probably once filled with snack items and drinks. I called out once again, offering my help if it was needed. Then I heard a deep, heavy whisper saying, "Get out." I understood what was said immediately, but I didn't understand why. Whoever said it would say that. I was also hearing heavy breathing in one corner of the room. It was enough to make me get the hell out of there in a hurry. On my walk back to my truck, this is what I heard, and there had to be at least 5 seconds of confusion. I didn't know if what I was hearing was real or not, if that even makes sense. I ran to my truck and called 911 because, to be honest, I was too scared to go back in that building. They asked for an exact location, and I couldn't tell them. All I could say was that I was by an abandoned gas station on some road in the desert. They asked me to stay on the line so I could describe my location better, but suddenly, the car in front of me turned on, started speeding down the desert road. I didn't even notice him getting into his car. It's so dark, and I was so distracted by the phone call. I ran back into the building to see if anybody was still in there, while, of course, keeping 911 on the line. I went to the back section where I'd heard the voice and breathing, and I was mortified to see a fresh pool of blood on the floor. I could only imagine what would happen. I explained into the phone that I believed I just stumbled into a crime scene. Eventually, they were able to send a bunch of state troopers to the scene. They asked me for any information I could give: license plate number, what the suspect looked like, what I thought happened. All I said was, it was a black Chevy Impala, early 2000s, and I heard a man tell me to get out before hearing a woman screaming as they left the building. There was nobody left behind, but I had a few ideas of what might have happened. I'm sure the state police took some blood samples and whatnot, but I wasn't able to be of much more assistance. Shamefully, I did not have a dash cam at that point to get the license plate number, but literally, the next week, I installed the dash cam into my assigned truck. This was just one of those once-in-a-lifetime experiences that will always haunt me. Hey there, enjoying the story so far? Please do us a huge favor and subscribe to the channel and turn on bell notifications so you get notified whenever we drop more videos in the future. This greatly helps the channel out, and we really appreciate it. So this was told to me by an old family friend, Michelle, numerous times as a kid growing up, as one of those life advice stories to keep in mind through the years, and to her credit, I've never forgotten it. Whenever anything associated with hitchhiking comes up, it always springs to mind and probably always will, even makes me a bit ill whenever I think about it actually. So Michelle, who grew up at the same time as my dad, so this was about early 80s I believe. She was a young woman in her mid-20s. She's one of those real kind-hearted souls, always willing to help another out in a time of need, you know? And I can't imagine her being anything other than that when she was younger, so I totally see her doing this too. So driving into the city, which was about a 2-hour drive from town, she saw a man walking down the side of the road. As she neared, he turned and in typical hitchhiker manner, stuck out the old arm and thumb. Michelle, bless her heart, pulled over and asked him if he needed any help. She told me he was really polite, if not a bit shy, when he asked for a lift into the city. Michelle gave a smile and popped open the passenger door for the guy, who then tossed his bag into the back seat and buckled up for the ride ahead. They talked pleasantly for most of the trip about friends, the news, etc. You know, happy small talk. She felt that they were getting along very well, and even bought him dinner at the pit stop a little over halfway there. She says he seemed really flustered and awkward when she paid, but one of the things they talked about was money and how he was pretty damn strapped for cash, which was why he was hitchhiking in the first place. But he eventually relented and they went on their way. As soon as they got into the city, he thanked her profusely for the ride and the food, and has to be dropped off once they hit downtown. Before getting out, he asked for Michelle's phone number so he could contact her one day and maybe catch up, thrilled at the prospect of knowing how her new friend was faring. Michelle wrote it down for him and drove off with a warm feeling of having done a good deed. Now I'm sorry if you were expecting something creepy to have happened by now, but I think this is what freaked me out so much as a kid. How nice everything seemed to have worked out. Michelle gets this crease in her forehead and a funny look in her eye when she tells me this next part, how a week later she got a phone call from the same man she had picked up. He didn't let her get a word in edgewise after hello and told her that she should thank God that she was raised so nice, because when he first got in the car, he was planning on raping and murdering her once they got to that pit stop. That he was going to steal that car and dump her body in a ditch further down the road and go on his merry way. But after she talked with him so kindly and even treated him to dinner with a smile on her face, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He didn't think that he could live with himself after doing that to such a nice lady. The man's final words on the phone were, "Please, Michelle, please never ever pick up another hitchhiker." Then he hung up the phone. Michelle never got a call from him again. When she tried redialing the number, she got a payphone. And so I've learned one important thing from this story, that I'm going to take that man's advice and never ever pick up a hitchhiker. I've learned one thing from my one and only experience picking up a hitchhiker. Don't pick up a hitchhiker. It was a Saturday night, probably around 1 in the morning. I was driving down the 542 in New Jersey, a road I commonly took to get into town. It was a long stretch of nothing but woods on either side, with the occasional residence. I was on my way back home from town, and, as usual at this time of night, around our quiet old town, there was not a single other car on the road. I turned on the off-road lights on my Jeep to have optimal vision on the unlit highway, which allowed me to spot somebody far down the road, just standing at the side. As I got closer, I saw him raise his arm up and stick up his thumb. He was trying to hitch a ride. My heart started racing. I had no idea if I should stop or not. I slowed down just to get a better look at the guy. First of all, he seemed like a younger man, maybe 28. He had on a light gray hoodie with a hood over his head and blue denim jeans. The time to make a decision was immediate, and with a lack of my better judgment, in the heat of the moment, I came to a stop, rolled down the window, and asked, "Where are you heading to, friend?" just up the road," he said in a deep, quiet tone. "Hop in," I called out the window. He opened the door to my Jeep and stepped inside slowly. By the way this guy was moving, I already regretted my decision to let him in. I put my foot on the gas, and we started moving along the road. The speed limit on this road was 55, but I was going 75 just to get the guy to his destination quicker. "So, how far did you say you're going?" There was an awkward gap of silence before he replied with, "Just a few miles up." I wanted to turn the radio on to kill this awkward and downright creepy silence, but something in my head told me not to, for whatever reason. Suddenly, I could see just through the corner of my eye that the man had turned his head and was staring in my direction. At this point, I was telling myself that I needed to get this guy out of my car. For a good mile, I felt his gaze just hitting me like a brick, and all the while, I tried my best not to look back. Finally, he turned his head the other way and said, "You know, I've been wondering for the longest time if it's just worth it to end it all." I looked at him in confusion. He dug his hand into his pocket and said, "I've been carrying this knife with me for the past few weeks, wondering when the right time would come." He pulled out a big red knife from his pocket, and at that instant, I felt like my stomach had dropped out of my body. I told him to put the knife away immediately. He told me, in a calm, emotionless voice, "Pull over next to that sign." I did what he said, coming to a stop next to a speed limit sign, and what followed still haunts me. He began to slit his forearm next to 3 other scars from previous assumed self-inflicted cuts and let out a disturbing moan. I managed to choke out the words, "You need to get out of my car right now, buddy." He looked at me again and said, "Get out of the car. I want to show you something." I told him no, and he raised his knife up closer to me as an obvious threat. "Just get out for a second. There's something I want to show you behind that sign." I knew my life was on the line, and I had to be smart. I said, "Yeah, okay man, let's go." I opened the door to my Jeep, making a point of leaving it open, raised my hands in the air, and backed away slowly from the door. He too left the car and started walking over to my side. At the exact moment that he was directly behind the car, I jumped back in, threw it into drive, and floored it down the road, never looking back. I got back home within 10 minutes, still breathing heavily and wanting to throw up. This was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, and I urge everybody and anybody that if you by some chance see a hitchhiker on a dead road at some odd hours of the night, do not take any course of action other than speeding right past them. 3 months after I turned 16 in 2005, I got my first car, a '99 Toyota Camry. On a warm Saturday night when my friend Jake invited me over to one of his friend's big parties, I knew I wouldn't be in a condition to drive the Camry home afterward. So, we carpooled with Jake's girlfriend Nikki. We lived in the countryside of Tennessee, meaning less big parties, meaning when there was a big party, it was a huge deal, and everyone would go. We lived about 5 to 10 minutes away from this kid's house. I knew where he lived, as I was acquainted with him, but not exactly friends. The whole ride there, we took the same 2-lane highway-type road through the woods, and this kid's house was actually on this road further down. At certain points on this road, there were a few houses on either side, and then it would just go back to being a long, empty highway again. The house was tiny, like a lot of houses around the area, but the party was held outside anyway since his closest neighbors were relatively far away, and noise wasn't an issue. I'll skip most of the party up until the point that Nikki, who was supposed to be our designated driver, had to suddenly leave for a small family emergency. Jake said it was fine and that we'd find a ride home. Well, fast forward another few hours and another few drinks, and I could barely even walk straight. I checked my watch, and it was like 2 in the morning. I figured it was time to go. I started looking for Jake, but I couldn't find him anywhere. In fact, it seemed like everybody I knew had already left. I could barely even think straight, but I was still furious at the fact that Jake could have actually left without me. I asked to use the party host's phone and dialed Jake's home number. After 2 tries, I gave up and then realized I shouldn't wake his family up. So literally, not knowing what else to do, I dizzily stepped out onto the road and began walking back home. I knew this walk would take anywhere from half an hour to an hour. In my condition, maybe. After 15 minutes of walking down the road, the slight shine of car headlights on the road was fading in from behind me. Jumping for joy inside, I lifted up my arm and stuck out my thumb. As the car neared, it slowed down and came to a stop right next to me. The man driving the '98 Ford Explorer rolled down the window and asked, "Where you headed?" I told him my house was just down the road and beyond the right turn, probably slurring my words beyond comprehension. He chuckled and told me to hop in. I thanked him and joyously hopped into the truck. I was exhausted, and I remember completely disregarding things the guy was asking me because I was so close to just passing out. And that's what happened. The memories of being in that truck turned to a fog, as I'm sure I passed out. The next thing I remember, I woke up still in the moving truck. The guy looked at me and left, but didn't say anything. I looked around and realized the road we were on wasn't familiar. I nervously asked, where are we going? He then said, "So what were you doing out this late anyway?" As the man answered my very straightforward question with another irrelevant question, the sobering reality of the situation hit me. You can let me out anywhere," I told the man. The man responded with a firm no. I felt like throwing up as he said that. No, I really actually felt like I was going to throw up. I started to gag as I felt more and more nauseous by the second. The man took his eyes off the road to look at me, and that's when I thought of the perfect distraction. I turned in his direction as I continued to gag, and he started to kind of lean away and slow down the car. Thankfully, I drank as much as I did because I finally threw up and made a point of doing it all over the man's lap. The man yelled in frustration and stopped the car, and that's when I took it upon myself to run for my life into the woods and duck behind a few bushes. The man came following into the woods with a flashlight, and on 2 separate occasions, he shined the light straight over me without noticing. Eventually, I heard his footsteps walk even further into the woods past me. That was when I ran back to his truck, but unfortunately, he was smart enough to lock it. By some miracle, I saw another car approaching in the distance, and I ran out into the middle of the street waving my arms like a lunatic. The car tried to avoid me, but I wouldn't let it. They were forced to stop, and I yelled at them to help me before they came back. Once I told them that I was kidnapped by the man who was driving that Ford Explorer. The driver agreed to give me a lift, not to the police station or anything but to my house. I made it back safely, where I couldn't thank the driver enough. I immediately woke up my parents and told them. My dad wanted to know if I got his tag number, and then I felt like punching myself in the face. I failed to get the simplest information from the guy that would have allowed me to actually properly report him. All I knew was that he drove a faded blue '99 Ford Explorer. I made sure to give Jake a piece of my mind, and part of me always held a grudge against him ever since, just for abandoning me at a party without telling me. I haven't seen him in 4 years now, however, and this was actually the first time I even thought about this incident for almost a year now. As time goes on, even the worst of memories may start to fade, but after writing this to share with the internet, it's once again fresh in my mind. When I was 22, I got a job in New York City. Living in Jersey, however, there was no way I'd be able to do that commute daily, so moving was a necessity. Only thing, I didn't have a lot of money yet, so when I saw an ad on Craigslist for an available bedroom in an apartment in the Hell's Kitchen area for a really low price. I jumped on it. I took a ride to the city the next day to view the apartment, and the landlord gave me a quick tour of the place. The landlord himself seemed a bit socially awkward, but that didn't really matter at all. The police did come with a catch. I'd have a roommate. The landlord said he's a very quiet to himself kind of person, which he said was good. My roommate's name would be Eric. The landlord knocked on Eric's door, asking if he'd like to come out and say hello. Eric didn't even answer. The landlord suggested he might be taking a nap, so we moved on to talking in the living room, where I said I was interested in renting. I signed an application, and the next day the landlord called and offered me the room, so I moved in the next week. My dad helped me unload all my furniture into my little room. Something odd to note was that never once did this Eric character come out during all this commotion to at least say hi. He was definitely home. We heard him moving around in his room. I came to the early realization that he probably wasn't going to be friendly at all. When we finished unloading the van, my dad left, and I was alone, officially moved out. I sat in my bed and started watching Netflix on my laptop. Then I heard the door to Bran's room open and closed. This seemed like my chance to go out and say hi. It was his first time leaving his room. I got out of my bed, but before I could even get to my bedroom door, the front door to the apartment slammed shut. I stepped outside to the living room and no one was there. I didn't know what the deal with this bread guy was, but surely he had to know we'd have to meet eventually. I went back to my room, ate a bowl of ramen, and went to sleep. I woke up when I heard the front door to the apartment closed again. Then footsteps followed. The footsteps on the creaky wood floor made their way to the outside of my door, then stopped. I sat up and looked at the crack below the door. The outlines of feet could be seen through the light creeping in under the door. Why was he just standing out there like a creep? Of course, I didn't say anything. I just waited for him to walk away. I didn't have my door locks. I was low-key terrified of him entering my room, but thankfully, he walked away from my door and back to his room, and I heard him shut his door. I tried to go to sleep, but all night, all I heard were thumps coming from his room. I had no idea what he could possibly be doing. I was tempted to go knock on his door and tell him to keep it down, but I hadn't even met the guy yet, so I had to deal with it. Eventually, I fell asleep, and when I woke up in the morning, it seemed Eric was out already, maybe at work. I didn't know at the time. I spent most of that day shopping for groceries and basic apartment necessities. When I got back, I dropped all the bags on the couch in the living room to give myself a rest. I cooked dinner, watched some Netflix on the couch, all the while Eric never came home, and did a quick run to the nearby 7-Eleven to get toothpaste. And when I got back, I noticed Eric's door was cracked open and the light was on, so I figured this was it, the moment for me to say hello. I went to his door, knocked slightly twice, and pushed the door open. What I found in there was shocking, or maybe I should say, what I didn't find him there. The room was completely empty, not a single piece of furniture except for a single chair sitting in the corner of the room, the kind of chair you'd find in a high school classroom. My heart suddenly started racing and I started to shake. I turned off the light in that room and shut the door. This brand person have been in the process of moving out. I went to my room, locked the door, and sat on my bed, suddenly getting a really bad headache. I took out my phone and decided to call the landlord to ask him what the hell was going on. After dialing his number, I put the phone to my ear and suddenly heard a loud ringing sound coming from my closet. I felt like my heart, which was already racing, was now in my stomach. The phone rang twice, then went to voicemail. I got out from the bed, ready to open the closet, but I stopped and realized that, given that the phone rang twice, that means he had his phone and he declined the call. I had the sick realization that the landlord was likely in my closet and there never even was a Eric. I ran to the bathroom, locked myself in, and called the cops. They got to the apartment shortly and searched the whole apartment with me. Sure enough, we found the landlord hiding under my bed. I tried pressing charges for trespassing, trying to get myself out of the lease, but it turned out there never even was a lease. But dude wasn't even an actual landlord. He didn't even own the apartment. I didn't get the rest of the story, like how he got the keys in the first place. I had my dad come the next day to help me move all my stuff back home. I found another apartment the next week. It was a huge hassle going through the whole moving process again. I knew from the start the so-called landlord gave off bad vibes, but who would have ever imagined the events that were about to take place? There was an ad on Zillow for a shared apartment near the chicken farm I worked at. I moved in because it was convenient and already furnished. I just dropped off my clothes and a mini dresser, and I already had a bed to sleep in the spare room. The man who was renting the room out to me was old. He was like 70 or something, and his name was Harper. It was a non-contractual agreement, meaning I'd pay him by the week, but he was more or less still a roommate. He was very old-fashioned, and then included everything in the house. I've never exactly come from a wealthy family, so trust me when I say this was a steal for me. One night, after getting home from a long day of work, I collapsed into bed and fell asleep like a baby. But suddenly, I woke to the bedroom door opening. Light poured into the wind from the hallway, and standing in the doorway was the old man. Then, with his hand on the doorknob, he said in his deep, hoarse voice, "Stay out of the basement." He said he knew I went down there. I defended myself and assured him I didn't, because I actually didn't. He shut the door, and I heard him walk downstairs. I sat there, I think, and this guy must be unstable or something. The next day I was off from work, then took his old jalopy down the road, I'm guessing to the store. Well, I was alone. I stared at the basement door. I knew it was the basement door because I'd seen him go down there before. I went to open it just to peek downstairs, but obviously it was pitch black down there. I would have never been compelled to go down there if it weren't for his bizarre remark about not going down there. But I figured he wasn't going to be home anytime soon, so I continued down. I found the light switch at the bottom step. For some reason, it was for the most part a normal basement so far, but there was a door in the corner. Behind that door was something unimaginable. The door was very hard to open because there was some rubber concealer under the door. I'm guessing to keep that awful smell out of the rest of the basement and house. The inside of this little room was a nightmare. Blood stains on the concrete floor. Black bags stacked in the corner of the room stretched long enough to be carrying bodies or body parts. And the smell of rotting life. I had to refrain from puking right there. I noticed the camera hung in the top right corner of the room, aimed down at some work harperch. I took a quick picture of the room and hurried out of there. I went up to the spare bedroom, packed all of my clothes in a garbage bag, and heard the front door slam shut downstairs. He was back. I played it cool and greeted him from the upstairs hallway. He didn't respond. I heard him open the basement door and stomp downstairs. I saw that as my cue to sprint to my car. I made it to my car and without looking back, drove away from there. I drove 15 miles back to my brother's farm and showed in the picture. He said I was an idiot for not calling the sheriff sooner. So I called 911 and told them to bring a search warrant to Harper's address and check the basement before he could clear it out. I made it clear I was simply his temporary roommate or tenant living with him and came across it. A few hours later, someone from the sheriff's department came to my brother's farm asking for my ID and some other information. I complied with them. They gave me the relieving news that Harper had been arrested. He was in the process of clearing any evidence from his basement, but he wasn't quick enough. The deputies didn't go into much detail about what exactly they found in those bags or anything else, but I don't think they were allowed to. They thanked me and went on their way. My brother let me stay with him for a few weeks till I was ready to get back out there and find another apartment. When I moved out from home, my dad's friend Kathy was subletting her apartment with 2 bedrooms. She said she'd give me a good deal. However, I'd have to share it with some older woman she found. She was tight on money, so I understood. Kathy introduced the woman and I the day I moved in. Her name was Margaret. She was like 60 years old. It felt weird knowing I'd have a roommate who could almost be my grandma. Since Kathy was subletting the apartment, it already had furniture. I just had to bring my own bed and dresser. The weirdness started on the second night. I was watching TV in the living room when Margaret's head appeared from behind the wall to the hallway, and she stared at me intently. She started muttering these strange, faint noises. "Margaret, you okay?" I asked. She groaned and disappeared back into the hallway. I immediately got on the phone with Kathy and asked if there was something wrong with Margaret. Kathy said there was nothing wrong with her, as far as she knew, though she only met her a week ago. When I told her about what Kathy just did, she was surprised. The next day, I ran into Kathy cooking eggs in the kitchen. She said good morning and asked her if she was okay last night. She seemed confused about what I was referring to, and I mentioned the way she was staring at me and making those noises. She claims she had no recollection of it. All I could chalk it up to in my head was some kind of psychotic break. Fast forwarding through normal, unnecessary fluff, I was laying in my bed on my laptop with the light off. There was a knock at my bedroom door. I muted my laptop and heard the same moaning and groaning sounds of Margaret from the night before. Quite frankly, I was uncomfortable with going out there, but this confirmed that something was definitely wrong with this woman. She kept knocking, it wouldn't stop, but the door was unlocked. If something was really wrong, I figured she'd come in. I really think the knocking and moaning went on for a full minute before I heard her walk away. It seemed these little episodes of hers would only happen at night. I almost wanted to be able to lock the door because it was kind of creepy, actually, but the door had no lock. But she left, so I was okay to go to sleep now. I woke up expecting it to be like 9 a.m., but it was pitch black. I looked at my clock, and it was 1:30 a.m. What I was woken up by became clear when there was a creak in the floor in the room. I saw a figure standing at the edge of my bed in the dark. "Margaret," I said. I heard the familiar groaning sounds again. I flipped on the lamp next to my bed, and there she was. The 60-something-year-old woman with her long graying hair, all disheveled, looking like a half-awake psycho. But really, the first thing I noticed was the large knife in her hand. I screamed a horrific scream as I carled Doopy in the corner of my bed, expecting her to attack or do something, but she just kept making strange sounds. Then, she left the room. I ran to shut the door and block it with the dresser. I tried calling Kathy, but she was obviously asleep. I had to make it through the night. It was a long 6 hours before the sun came up. I called Kathy at 8 o'clock and explained everything, and then I told her she needed to evict Margaret immediately. She couldn't believe it, but she still apologized and said she'd be over that day. Kathy came to speak to Margaret. She couldn't just evict her right away without a notice, though, and the eviction process takes months, so Kathy told me it was best if I just left the apartment and found somewhere else to live while she dealt with Margaret. Margaret apologized and said she had no recollection of any of the stuff happening. After Kathy and I did some research, we determined Margaret most likely had a severe case of sundowning syndrome, which causes people to become confused or aggressive late in the day when the sun goes down. It's really terrifying knowing, and whatever confused state of mind she was in, she likely had the intention of coming into my room and stabbing me for whatever reason. I used to work the night shift at a gas station on the side of some highway in the country from the hours of 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. The road was pretty dead. I would have maybe 1 or 2 people come in to pick cash in a whole night. It was a very boring and depressing job, especially doing the graveyard shift, but I had just finished college and I needed to pay off my loans. The only reason I kept this job was because my boss threw me an extra $5 an hour for doing the night shift. On this one cold December night, I was doing my usual thing, reading the newspaper, playing games on my phone, and whatnot, when I noticed the headlights of a car pulling off the highway into the parking lot. It was a red pickup truck. Somebody stepped out and shut the door. I went back to reading the paper as I saw that he was standing by the gas pump. I assumed he wasn't paying cash. I looked up a few moments later and saw that he was still standing in the same position, staring at the gas pump. I almost felt obligated to go out and help him. He was obviously confused. I felt a cold chill run up my spine as I saw the 6-foot-something tall man slowly turn his head to face me. I couldn't make out any features of his face, but I knew he was staring at me. I tried to pretend I didn't notice by going back to reading the paper. Of course, I wasn't really reading now. I was a bit shaken by the guy out there. I just wanted him to pay debit or credit and leave. I looked up and gasped as the man was now much closer to the front door of the building. It wouldn't have been so disturbing if it weren't for the fact that he wasn't moving. He was just standing still as before, still looking in my direction. I walked over to the door to get a closer look. All I could see in his face was still blackness. I locked the door and flipped the open sign to close down the door. I didn't care if this would possibly get me in trouble. I was not taking a chance because, quite frankly, I was scared shitless. I walked back behind the counter and sat down on one of the containers on the floor, just so I couldn't see the man outside anymore. I stayed in that position for a good 5 minutes, texting every friend I have to see who was awake. I was desperate to tell somebody about this. When I finally got up to check that he was gone, I let out a full scream as the man was now right outside the door. I picked up the phone on the counter and called the police. The operator was reluctant to send somebody over because of the way I described the situation, but I persuaded them. I hid behind the counter, bowled up like a child. I began to hear heavy thumps at the door, not innocent knocks to catch my attention. I mean thuds and thumps, trying to break down the door. And then eventually, it finally stopped. I heard the sound of a car starting outside and then driving off. I looked outside and he was gone. A patrol cop, along with a state trooper, pulled into the parking lot. I reported the red pickup truck and told them which direction I thought he went in. I couldn't describe his face, as all I saw was blackness. Of course, there wasn't much the police could do, as the man didn't really do anything. I left that job a few months later to a job in the city. It was 3 years ago. I was called in to do the night shift, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. at 7-Eleven since somebody called out. The store was located on a busy road in a rather quiet and rural area. During the night shift, you could expect anywhere from 10 to 20 people come in to buy a beer or something else. This one particular night, there was this one guy, mid-20s, that came in. He started making weird noises, like loud yelling noises. I assumed he had some kind of mental disability. In fact, my brother has a mental disability, so I immediately felt sympathy for the guy. He walked up to the counter without any items, with his head facing me, but his eyes were looking up at the ceiling. I felt uncomfortable. I honestly didn't know how to deal with it. I tried speaking with him, but he only responded in loud noises. I kept checking if he was with someone outside, but he was alone. There weren't any cars in the parking lot, so I assumed he walked. He stood there for so long, looking up at the ceiling and making noises, that I tried to get him out by handing him a bag of chips and telling him he can go. I tried finding some kind of number to call for someone to help him. Then, Out of nowhere, he finally turned around and walked out of the store. I felt so horrible for the men, but at the same time, I felt a bit creeped out. About an hour later, the phone on the counter rang. I picked up to hear the familiar yelling sounds of the man from earlier. It caught me off guard. I didn't know what to think, other than this has to be some kind of prank. I hung up on them and was now becoming paranoid of my surroundings, constantly checking the outside through the windows. Come 4 o'clock, the person working after me came in, finally allowing for me to go home. It wasn't my problem anymore. I got home and threw all my stuff on the table, ready to get to sleep, but my phone rang within a minute after entering the door. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would someone be calling at 4 a.m.? I could only imagine it was bad news. I braced myself and picked up the phone to hear the man again. I felt sick to my stomach as I listened to the loud noises he made. All night, I felt like I was being watched, even with all the blinds shut, and I could swear I heard strange noises coming from all over my house. I refused to get any sleep until the sun came up. Weeks passed, and I had forgotten about the incident until one day, when going into the basement for the first time in a while, I found that papers had been scattered all over the floor, and when I went into the basement closet, I found writing on the walls. 711 had been written in Sharpie on the wall, along with the address to the 7-Eleven I worked at, and my house address. The most disturbing part, I also found various kitchen knives, along with a large pocket knife sitting in the closet, which started out as seemingly just an innocent person, turning into something of a prank, ultimately turned into something much more horrifying. He had been living down there for God knows how long, and I'm just grateful that for whatever reason, he changed his mind and left, because I haven't seen or heard from him since. All I can say is that man is dangerously ill. I was working the night shift at my local Walmart. Back when it used to be open 24 hours a day, there would normally be less than 10 customers throughout my shift, but I wouldn't get to sit around and do nothing though. They wanted me to work on stock when I wasn't helping a customer. It was a bigger Walmart, so oftentimes there may have been one other person in the building, whether it be someone working on stock or someone cleaning. This night, I was the only one working. I was stocking in the cereal aisle when I heard something fall over in the next aisle. I would always hear the door to the store sliding open. It was the loudest thing ever, so it kinda caught me off guard that there might have been a customer in the building. Of course, it wasn't weird yet, not until I looked to my left and saw a man standing by the edge of the aisle, shooting me a blank stare. "Do you need something, sir?" I asked him. No. Could you just point me to the eggs?" he said. He wasn't normal looking. His face looked weird, not exactly ugly, just unusual, like his upper lip kind of came out too far, or almost like a Simpsons character. I was a bit uncomfortable that I had to deal with ringing him up. I hurried to finish the cereal aisle, and when I was done, I began to bring the Ubo cart to the back room. I was stopped halfway when the same guy cut me off through the middle section of the aisle. I want to note this guy was probably in his mid-30s, and at the time, I was only 22, though I looked much younger. The guy stopped me and started trying to make awkward small talk. He started by asking me my name, how old I was, if and where I went to school, and why I was doing the night shift. His questions started to get weirder when he asked me if I went to parties a lot, and if I had a girlfriend. I told him I didn't, and then he asked me if I've ever had a boyfriend while putting his hand on my shoulder. I immediately started walking away with the cart, but he followed me. I told him I wasn't into whatever he was thinking about. I went faster and faster until I finally made it to the back storage room. He didn't follow me in. I wasn't supposed to stay back there for extended periods of time to avoid customer theft. I decided it would be best to just wait for him by the register so that he would ring his stuff up and leave, but I waited there for at least 20 minutes. He never came. I decided he was gone, and whether he stole the eggs and something else, there wasn't anything I could do now. I had to go to the bathroom, so I took a quick jog to the back of the store and into the employee bathroom. Moments after sitting on the toilet, my heart dropped into my stomach as I heard the bathroom door open. I choked the urge to say something like, "You can't be in here," but I didn't want to give away my position. I lifted my leg so that I wouldn't be visible from under the stall, and what happened next was simply horrifying. I sat there for the longest time, looking at the floor, not moving a muscle. When I finally looked up, I could see an eye peering through the crack of the stall door. I screamed. I knew I was trapped. I knew I had one shot at making a move. I grabbed the box cutter in my pocket and began sliding it through the crack of the door, forcing him to move his eye away. I took that chance to slam the stall door open in his face and hightail it out of the bathroom and all the way out of the store. I called my boss at least 5 times before he finally picked up and explained everything. He told me to call the cops, and so I did. Of course, the man wasn't in the store anymore by the time the cops showed up. I only did the night shift twice after that, and luckily didn't see the man again. I've been working at McDonald's now for over 5 years, and this is still my creepiest experience there. This happened 2 years ago when I was 18, and I had been working my first overnight shift on front counter. I usually work in the kitchen on overnights, so I had no interactions with any of the customers until then. I was working from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., which is a usual overnight shift for us. Around 3 a.m., I was making some fries when I noticed a man standing there and trying to take pictures with his cell phone of me and my other female co-worker, Lauren. I pointed it out to her, and she just rolled her eyes in annoyance and went to take an order and drive-through, telling me it happened a lot. I was instantly uncomfortable. I wanted to tell the manager, but he was in the office doing his manager stuff, and I didn't want to bother him. I went over with what I felt was a nervous smile and quickly did my usual greeting. "Hello, what can I get for you?" He just kind of looked at me and stayed quiet. He was about 5'8", white, early 20s, medium build with dark hair and brown eyes. An average man, I would say. But something about his piercing glare made me feel super uncomfortable. Then he smiled, a smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Fine, I'll just have a coffee, black, sweetie," he said, and I could instantly smell alcohol on his breath. I nodded and told him the price before he pulled out a $5 bill and went to hand it to me, making sure our hands touched. I avoided his gaze and went to hand back his change when he winked at me and went to go wait for his coffee. I went to go make it as fast as I could, but just my luck, we were out of coffee on both the front counter and the drive-thru, as we don't sell much through the night. I turned around and kept as little eye contact as I possibly could. "I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to bring you a fresh pot. Should only take about 3 minutes." "Don't worry, I don't mind. I have quite the view while I wait," he replied, shooting me a wink. I just smiled awkwardly and looked away. I had to make sure I didn't fall behind on my shift, so I began to set up the muffins on the display so we had them all ready for breakfast, which starts at 4 o'clock. I am in Canada, so Susan I heard behind me. Realizing it was the guy, I instantly tensed, wondering how he knew my name, before I noticed I had my name tag on and quietly cursed to myself. I turned around and looked at him, and he said, "What time are you stuck here until tonight?" Beautiful. I instantly panicked, as I didn't do well in these situations. "7, I said nervously, which then the guy gave me a huge grin. "Oh, so you still have time before you're off, eh?" I nodded and noticed the coffee was done pouring, so I went over and made his coffee as he watched me with an intense stare. I handed it to him before saying, "Have a nice night," earning me another wink. He then waved and said as he turned around, "I'll see you later, Susan." I watched as he walked out the door and tried to calm myself down. He doesn't actually know when I'm off, so I'm okay, I thought to myself. 6 a.m. rolled around, and it was finally time to go. I still felt a little paranoid about the guy, but I knew it was now in the past. My co-worker Evan was going to drop me off at home as we carpooled, so we got our stuff together and left. As we were heading to his car, I noticed a parked car with someone in it, and of course, it was the guy. I panicked and quickly told Evan that was the guy, as I had told him what happened not long ago. He instantly brought me into his coat and did his best to keep me hidden. As we walked quickly to his car, he made sure no one followed the car, dropped me off, and watched as I went inside, telling me to stay safe. I thanked him before going into my house and going to bed. The next day, I went into work and got asked by my manager how I got home. I told them Evan gave me a ride. My manager looked confused and said something that made my blood run cold. Well, that's strange, because some guy was here looking for you just before 7 o'clock. He said he was here to pick you up. I thought before that the man's intentions weren't good, just the way he looked at me and spoke to me like I was prey, and this pretty much confirmed it. Since then, I have refused to work front counter overnight shift, and we no longer wear our name tags overnight. And that wraps up tonight's terrifying tales. Want to see more of this content? Click the video on screen to watch more real horror story tales. Which story chilled you the most? Tell us about it below. Also, if you have any horror stories you would like to share, please comment that too. We will pick the best ones and do a video on it in the future. And any other topic suggestions you want to see on our channel, do let us know. Until next time.